because I want to be able to share this with folks that weren't able to attend. Um, so with that, let's get on. So I put together a little bit of an agenda. I want to talk a little bit about designing local, so you know who I am and what my firm does, and why we're working on this. Talking a little bit about what the public art program in Port St. Lucie looks like. Show you a few existing pieces, which many of you probably know. And also we'll do a little bit of overview of the plan. And then I know most people probably know a little bit about public art, but I want to make sure that I give a little bit of an overview of what public art looks like in other communities, just for folks that aren't so familiar. So who are we at Designing Local? We are an urban planning firm. We do public art, historic preservation, urban design, but our bread and butter, if you will, what we really concentrate on and love is placemaking and public art. So we do this kind of work around the country, and here's a little sampling of places that we've worked. We've been in business for going on 6 years now, and so it's really national in scale what we do. We are based in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, so you see a lot of projects in Ohio there. But it's not unusual for us to be, well, it wasn't unusual for us to be traveling around the country. Now we're doing a lot of digital travel around the country. But so what's good about that from our perspective is that we get to see all kinds of different communities, and we get to work in really all types of different communities. And that's the fun part. Port St. Lucie, in terms of other places that we've worked, it has some similarities, but is a very unique community. And so it's exciting to get to do that and to bring our kind of national view of things, and talk and learn more about specific communities. So a little bit about the Port St. Lucie Public Art Program. It's funded by a funding mechanism called Percent for Art in Private Development. So what that means is all new construction projects, except for single family homes, have to dedicate 1% of the cost of their development towards public art, and that's up to $100,000. So if there's a $10 million project being built, an office building or a retail plaza or something like that, the max that they have to contribute is $100,000. And I'll show a few examples of pieces later, but and Patty has heard me talk about this before, but as the last time I was in Port St. Lucie, the hotel that I stayed at, I looked out, and out in front, it was a new hotel. Out in front, there was this nice new piece of public art, and I verified, but yes, it was a part of this program. So you see pieces popping up around Port St. Lucie. Developers also have the option of contributing 80% of what they would have spent directly to the city, and that goes into a public art fund that can be spent on public art. So most of you probably know a little bit about this, but I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of understands how that's actually set up. Does anyone have any questions about that in particular? No? Feel free to chime in. Here's some examples of pieces that have been funded through the program, either placed directly, like this one was, placed, I think in St. Lucie West or Tradition, very close to where I stayed last time, actually. And then you have, this is a piece that's going in a roundabout, and so the last piece was installed by the developer. This piece will be installed by the city in a roundabout, and that, like this one, was funded through those in lieu of funds that developers gave to the city rather than putting in pieces of public art themselves. Here's an example of a piece that this is actually the maquette. This is a picture taken at City Hall. And this is an example of a piece that a developer is installing. And it's kind of hard to see, but in the image to the left there, you can see there's going to be a series of these agave that are going to be installed in a landscaped area towards the front of a new project that's being put in place. And we are actually working right now on getting website finalized through the city. The city will have a website, and then we'll have some rotating images of different pieces of public art. And eventually we're going to have a database that is publicly accessible of all the public art that has been installed in Port St. Lucie through the public art program. So you may have seen some of these postcards around town back when we were all going out and about a little bit more. But we're really trying to engage with the public now in a different way than we were previously. So we have, one of the things that we're doing is collecting surveys, doing all kinds of things. And I'm gonna go through and just give a little overview of what the process is going to be. And of course, things have changed a little bit. So when we kicked this off earlier this year in February, I visited Port St. Lucie. We put together a detailed work plan of what we're going to do. We're working on the website. This is kind of all the beginning phase of the project. And then now we're kind of in the community engagement phase, and this was going to be much more in person, but like I said, we're moving towards digital means. So that kind of heightens the importance of the survey work that we're doing. So we have a survey available online. It's at cityofpsl.com/publicart, and I encourage you to share that link with people in your networks, whether that's through email or posting on social media. We are going to do a campaign coming up soon around potentially giving out a prize or something like that based on people taking the survey. So that's really helpful for us because we can't reach those people in person like we were planning to. So surveying is going to be really important, and then conversations like this. We are going to work together and hopefully come up with a vision that we're going to articulate for Port St. Lucie, minus the downtown, sorry, that's a typo. And then eventually we will be putting together a graphical version of the document. We'll be presenting that to the community and getting feedback on our specific recommendation points that we've made. And then we'll create a final master plan and present that again to council and residents. Based on how things are going now, we don't know what that's going to look like, whether it'll be in person sometime late in 2020 or whether that will be continue to be, you know, in a digital format like this, but there will be opportunities to engage with us further in the future and give feedback on the plan. So what we're really here to do is to determine what public art could be in Port St. Lucie. And this is where I'm going to go through and show you some examples of public art in other places and kind of talk a little bit about what public art can do in the scale that we're looking at doing for the city of Port St. Lucie. So public art, you know, traditionally is like guys on horses. You know, in the most traditional sense, you can imagine bronze sculptures of kind of, you know, generals on horseback, and that's kind of the traditional look and thought of public art. But things are changing. I mean, there's still lots of monumental art being made. This is actually in Richmond, Virginia, which if you've been following anything about things in the past couple of years has been, you know, they have a lot of those kind of traditional sculptures. And they're looking at, well, how can we add some different things in that might still have the same look? So this is a program to add influential women into the kind of sculptural collection, and New York City has a similar program to this. So there's still these opportunities for that kind of monumental sculpture that might be a little bit different interpretation than what we think of in the most traditional sense. For us, for designing local, we are really excited about turning mundane spaces into interesting spaces. So this is a parking garage. and a mural on that parking garage that really transforms what would otherwise just be a blank concrete wall into something that is engaging and interesting. This is an example of, this is again, this is a fence, a chain link fence at a transit station. And, you know, from just looking straight on, you might not be able to see what it is, but you turn your perspective and you can see faces. And I believe the faces, the artist actually used faces of people that they had seen at this transit station. So, you know, again, it's just a chain link fence, but through public art, we can really make it something much more interesting than it ever was or was going to be. We also love this idea of public art as bringing unexpected, really whimsical things to public spaces. So this is a temporary exhibition, and you can see those are actually blow up rabbits. And there's some like temporary landscaping there on the ground. But this idea is really just to transform these spaces, draw people out, even in this time of, you know, isolation and quarantine. People are still able to go outside, and if we have these interesting spaces, we're not encouraging people to congregate, but we are encouraging people to get out and explore. And the more fun public art we have, the more people can still engage with their civic nature. I was on a call earlier for a project in Georgia that we're working on, and somebody had put up a big kind of temporary mural type thing that just says like, we're going to be okay. And they said that people actually are like driving to this place to take a picture with it. And they've turned it into a larger campaign of getting yard signs made from this temporary piece of public art. So, you know, again, it can be, these things can be engaging even in this situation that we're dealing with. This is a piece of public art that is very close to my heart because it's very close to where I live. This is Columbus, where we live. And the artist Terry Allen did this piece. It's actually a series of pieces, but they are, you know, human form deer. And this is on the Scioto River, and the Scioto derives its name from hair of deer. And so the artist was inspired to do this deer, and it's truly human scale. It's probably 5 feet tall. But the amount of people that are drawn to this thing, people go out here, they put scarves on it during the winter, they put like a Rudolph nose on it at Christmas. I have a friend that got married in downtown Columbus where this is at, and insisted on going and taking wedding photos next to this thing. So when you have these kind of fun, whimsical, unexpected things, people tend to be drawn to it, and they can become symbols for the city actually, and help cement the identity of those cities. And this is something that I think I said this at a different time, but when you land in the airport, not that many people are in Columbus, there's a giant panographic image with the deer right at the center of it. So that these things really, really can transform the way people think about places and spaces, just through some fun, unexpected public art. This is another great example. I believe this is in Boston. And, you know, again, there are ways to interact with our natural environments. Some things call for more sensitive interactions, and some things can be more fun and whimsical, and that really depends on each site. But there are really opportunities to create something fun like this. And, you know, getting back to those kind of mundane spaces, this is really all about turning something that is boring, parking garages are generally boring, into something much more interesting and maintain that function. So, you know, this is kind of a windscreen. This is in California. This is by the artist Christian Moeller. And the hands are derived from, this is at an airport, and the hands are derived from people's hands that he photographed at the terminal. And again, it's just creating this, using something to create something much more interesting, something functional. This is in Pittsburgh. They have a really strong bike rack program in Pittsburgh to create artistic bike racks. And one of the things, one of the, I suppose, slight downsides to this was that these bike racks are so popular that people don't even really use them as bike racks because they're really great pieces of public art. So there's many examples, but this is kind of a fun one. But there are lots of opportunities to turn functional things into public art. And I don't know that this is a huge issue in Port St. Lucie, but in many communities that are older and have highways built through them, these kind of highway underpasses are very inspiring places. And actually, I take that back. The new crosstown bridge that was put in, that's a great example. If anybody's been there and seen the plaza underneath it, a great example of turning what otherwise would be kind of an uncomfortable space into something really interesting and a place where people actually want to be. And that can help increase the safety and really make these uncomfortable spaces more aesthetically pleasing. This is actually in Birmingham, and this was, used to kind of make an unsafe underpass feel much more comfortable and help connect two different communities that were divided by this highway. And this is a really successful example of a thing that really took an unsafe place and turned it into a place where a lot of people want to go now because it is so fun and interesting. And depending on the perspective, it's a rainbow. So from the other perspectives, it kind of looks even more interesting. And why does this really matter in Port St. Lucie? Port St. Lucie is a growing community, and I think we already have the funding mechanism in place, but there are lots of reasons why we should continue to encourage this and why it's important for us to help people understand why public art is so important. Part of it is just creating that sense of unexpectedness in the community, turning what might even be really nice public spaces into public spaces that are much more interesting to engage with and will draw people in. But a lot of this is about economic development. It's about creating spaces that are going to encourage, new residents, that are going to encourage businesses to open, that will drive people to these spaces, or that will just overall make the community more interesting and safer. So, oh gosh, and all the way back to the beginning. Sorry for going through this. Because I have another great example that I want to show you next, which is, and these are all fun, I could look at these pictures all day. This is actually an example out of Portugal, and this is an artist that you'll see later too. Her name is Janet Eckelman, and she does these really interesting net pieces. And there's actually one is going in Delray Beach, Florida. But this was a roundabout in Portugal, and they installed this piece of public art over top of the roundabout. It was never intended to be a public space, really. There weren't even sidewalks built to get inside the roundabout. But because this public art is so interesting, it just naturally drove people out to this public space. And one of the things that I think is really great about this is I don't know if it's still true, but at the time, if you go to Google Maps and you type in Portugal, an image will come up, and it's an image of this piece of public art, and that's for the whole country of Portugal. So, I mean, public art can really do a lot of things, but it's, you can see if it can drive people to sit in a roundabout that was never intended to be used by people, public art can drive people to our public spaces and really help create those community connections. It can also help express the values of the community in an outward way. So a lot of newer communities, which Port St. Lucie would be included, have they don't have that traditional downtown. They don't have some of those traditional spaces. And sometimes they lack the, the ability to really showcase what the culture and what the character of the people that live in the community are. So public art can be an opportunity to do that. And this is actually an example from Los Angeles, and they have a very large Armenian community there. And so these are images. This artist did a project showcasing the faces of the you know, people that actually came from Armenia, and telling the story of that community in Los Angeles. So there are lots of opportunities to do things like that. And I think that it's a really interesting way to engage with folks. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit, take a little bit of time and hopefully hear from you all to talk about what is the essence of Port St. Lucie? What is important for us to highlight about Port St. Lucie? What makes it unique? Or, you know, what should we focus on to try and make more unique? What are the kinds of things that are important when it comes to telling the story of Port St. Lucie? So I'd love to open it up for thoughts, discussion. Feel free to, you know, raise your hand or just unmute and go for it.
Well, since we, the last several years, I think the center of the city, because we don't have a downtown, has become the Botanical Gardens, which I'm on the board of directors, and I think you've probably seen our plan for the art there. And I think other people who had thought of expanding that art plan out from the gardens down our linear parkway, down Veterans Memorial Parkway, and to some other places where the whole city would become tied together through this artwork. But the essence of Port St. Lucie, you know, it's not as definable as a big city. You know, I'm from LA and I in Boston, and that would be easy to define, but maybe Richard has some ideas about what the essence of Port St. Lucie is.
I think you're picking on me because I'm the only one with a picture up here.
Oh, you can't see us?
Oh, I only see you, Laura.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just you two that have your
Josh.
video on. Everybody else is joining by audio.
Oh,
But,
okay.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Laura. You know, we call ourselves the city for all people. And that's kind of amorphous to I believe myself, you know. So I don't know what I would define as a something particular about Port St. Lucie, but I would agree with Laura that the botanical gardens and the properties north and south are becoming a central downtown or a gathering place for Port St. Lucie, and we would like to see that continue and maybe expanded, and art brought into that area and the properties north and south of it.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense when we were in Port St. The last time I was in Port St. Lucie, I actually did a River Nights event where we kind of went out and engaged with folks, and it was definitely a gathering spot. And with the river walk going in and all those things, it certainly kind of cements that role of that area as being a meeting place. Michelle, you had something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to say that one of our main challenges that we face at the Botanical Gardens with having art displays and moving forward with our arts program is the fact that we do not have security fencing. Just about anybody can walk onto our property at any time. And it's because we don't have that security fencing, we would need, the only way that we could have art there would be something that would be large enough that a couple of people couldn't pick up and carry off. So that becomes a challenge for us with that kind of public art. And having the arts programs that a lot of the other botanical gardens can very easily do. One thing that we can focus on might be more like the river walk type of events where we can do more performance arts and have performance incorporated. But as far as having visual art displays, we're challenged because of security issues.
That's a very good point. Very good point. And I know, and it can be challenging. Even Patty Tobin, who is joining us from the city of Port St. Lucie. I know that she's had a lot of difficulties getting plinths installed at City Hall. So it's not always an easy thing to get the art installed and definitely ensure that it's secured. So that absolutely makes sense.
Was it part of the Art in the Gardens plan, though, Michelle, to have cement bases poured that where the temporary exhibits could be attached?
Correct. That is part of the plan. However, we still have the issue of people coming in possibly damaging art. So again, that limits our ability. We becomes an insurance or a liability issue if we bring art onto the grounds without having a secure fencing around the property.
Tim, you had something to add?
Yes, I'd just like to say that yes, not having a fence does limit maybe the types of art that we could have, but what we are looking for is basically the larger sculptures that would be going in on the basically plinths, and it would be a rotating basis, like you were saying, Laura. I see it as part of public art is pretty much when you're putting it in roundabouts and other areas that are basically accessible. 24 hours a day, it's just one of those risks of doing it. I think, we do need to look at making, looking at things so they can't be carried off, so to speak.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of the public art that has already been installed is large scale, and that is certainly something that the artists typically think, especially if it's art that is being designed for that space, is something that artists end up having to think about a lot, because especially in pedestrian, maybe not in a place like Port St. Lucie, but in a place where there's a lot of foot traffic, people are going to do like that deer that I showed you earlier. That's a place where there's a lot of foot traffic, and so that is something that we rely on artists to do when we're doing these larger pieces, to really understand the impact and how that's going to impact things. I do want to show, because I don't know where all of you live, and maybe that's something that you can share, but I want to show you this map of Port St. Lucie, and this is something that the city has been working on, the kind of neighborhood initiative, and I don't know how easy it is for you to see this, but each neighborhood has gone through a process of solidifying a name for itself, and they're doing a lot of work around that idea. And obviously you're all involved in the botanical garden, but I would guess that most of you are residents of Port St. Lucie. So I'd love to hear more about where you think different places in the community that would be good for public art, in addition to the botanical garden and the various parks surrounding it. Anybody has any thoughts?
I don't know if I'm still unmuted.
You are, yes.
Okay, great. This is Michelle, and I just wanted to say that I live in, technically in Northport Village, real close to St. Lucie North.
Okay.
And I would say that part of where I live is really old, and part of where I live is new construction. So it's kind of that mixed community, and I would be really hard challenged to determine where might be a great place for public art. However, in the St. Lucie North area, that St. James corridor I think is a real perfect area for public art, because there's a big median strip between the northbound and southbound.
That's great. Yeah, one thing, I mean, just as a comment, one thing that we're intending to do as part of this planning effort is, we will likely identify some specific places where public art could be, but the scale of this map, isn't all that easy to see. But Port St. Lucie, of course, is a huge community geographically. So we'll be doing alongside this idea of identifying some locations that would be great places for public art, we'll also be identifying location types that we would prioritize for public art in the future, so that if a project is happening, we might say, well, we have determined that roundabouts are a place where we would like to place public art, or you know, in streetscapes, or along trails. So just various areas that we have identified, so that in the future we can still kind of say, okay, well, these are the types of places we identified, even if we can't spell out every intersection or neighborhood entrance or roundabout in Port St. Lucie, since it is such a large place.
Josh,
But
this is Patty.
yeah.
Michelle, I don't know if you know, but the Relate sculpture that Josh showed earlier, which is actually being fabricated right now, will be going at the intersection of Bayshore and Selvets, the roundabout.
Oh, great. Okay.
And then the other thing that we've heard from other people is St. James, and using something related to Oxbow, whether animals or those things that are typically around the river. I think when you guys talk the Botanical Gardens and Westmoreland Park, I see it bigger than that. I see it as the river. I think the river is a primary example of what Port St. Lucie's all about.
One of the things that I would like to see, Josh, is somehow trying to figure out how we can encourage local artists. One of the things that I see happening is that we encourage out of town a lot more than we encourage local artists. And I'd like to see more encouragement of art that's being created in the area.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I know that one of the hard things with public art is it really is dependent on the scale. At a certain scale, it becomes kind of a national thing, because the artists working on these large scale pieces are located all over the country. And I think one of the benefits of being in Florida, particularly, I'm not all that great on my geography, but I would say you're adjacent to South Florida, is that there are it is a very art-centric area. There's a lot of artists, all up and down the east coast of Florida. So hopefully that can be a benefit moving forward, whether it's somebody from Port St. Lucie or the area, or even just South Florida, that becomes easier. And I think that one of the things we have done in other communities, and maybe a possibility here, is kind of set guidelines of where how, when we're doing calls for artists, we might say, well, if it's a smaller scale thing, then let's definitely keep that something that is open to St. Lucie County or South Florida or Florida. And on some of the larger scale things, it might be something that we need to look around, because, I can use the Columbus as an example, because I showed you a piece from here. There are a few artists in Columbus. Of course, they're not going to create all the art that goes in the community, but there is a measure of balance there, that we do want to represent local artists, and we also want to acknowledge that it is kind of a national thing, just based on the industry itself. So, but I think that's a very good point. And one of the good things that we've done so far is we had another meeting like this with the Port St. Lucie Art League. And so it's really nice to see that organization growing. They have a lot of artists. I think they have 90 artists in Port St. Lucie. So there are people in Port St. Lucie doing artwork, so that's great.
Also, our public art ordinance encourages local artists.
Yes.
There were 3 artists selected for the roundabout at Selvets and Bayshore, and one of those was Jeffrey Smith from Stewart. So we do consider that a part of the program.
Yeah, I have heard it said that, we prefer outside. So I would like to reverse that and say we prefer inside.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that.
It is always it's certainly always something that comes up in discussions. So I think it not just in Port St. Lucie, but everywhere, because just like we always want to support our local businesses and support local restaurants and all those kinds of things. We want to support local artists too. So there's absolutely a balance, and so hopefully we'll be able to make sure that's clear in the plan that we're striving for a balance of ensuring that there's local representation, and also understanding that sometimes there is a need for a national kind of perspective. I think that's great. Are there another thing I'd like to kind of touch on is certain types of public art. So I'm going to switch back to my presentation here, and we'll just go through these and then we can discuss. But when we're looking at different types of locations, obviously we're looking at different applications of public art. So in communities, that have a lot of blank walls, murals are always a great thing. I know that there are, I believe there's a pretty good mural program in Fort Pierce. Am I right, Patty?
Yes.
And I have, seen a few other murals in the community. A lot of places that you see murals are older, with kind of the traditional blank building facades, something that we try not to have in newer planned communities. So there are probably opportunities for murals in Port St. Lucie. It might not be a key component of the public art program just based on the types of buildings that we have. So obviously this is another building in an older community, and murals, of course, are fun and can be really great, are a little bit more semi-permanent than some other types of public art. There's also this idea
of— Before you go on from the murals,
say that, Patty?
Before you go on from the murals, we got an NEA grant.
Oh, yes.
To do a mural at Minsky Park related to diversity, and that should be going out for a call to artists relatively soon.
And there's a mural at City Hall. So I think those have been good opportunities to find those types of spaces that could be, used for public art, even though the setting isn't what we might immediately think of as locations for murals. So I think that's a great point, Patty.
That alligator belongs in Florida.
It does. And maybe it is. I don't actually know where this image is from. Hopefully somewhere where there are alligators.
I don't know. It's brick.
Yeah. There's a lot of gateway public art. This is another one from Columbus, but you'll see it around all around the country. And Port St. Lucie, I think, is a good community for gateway public art. And I told Patty the last time we talked, or the last time I was in Port St. Lucie, she called me to check where I was. I was coming from the airport, and I had just gotten off on an exit, and I looked and saw a utility box mural. And I said, oh, I'm in Port St. Lucie, because I know that this is part of the Port St. Lucie mural program. So gateway public art is a really nice way to identify that you're entering a community. And for a community like Port St. Lucie, it's a nice way to help people understand, you are in Port St. Lucie. This is helping to create our identity. This is a piece in Nashville. And it's actually, these are like really big utility poles that are painted to look like, something fun. The piece is called Sticks, and it is in a large roundabout just outside of downtown Nashville. So roundabouts, of course, we've already been talking about a piece that's going in a roundabout in Port St. Lucie, but as that type of infrastructure continues to be built all over Port St. Lucie and other places, roundabout pieces of public art are something that is only growing. We have opportunities for public art, in our park space, waterways, and so that's always a good opportunity. And then we have opportunities in our large scale public spaces. So this is in Denver. And I don't know if anybody has seen this before, but this is the Big Blue Bear, and this is at the Denver Convention Center. So those kind of large scale public spaces lend themselves to kind of large scale public art that is fun and interesting. And then we have these kind of overlooked spaces, and this is in Louisville. And this is by an artist named Mark Riegelman. And so this is kind of just a droll public space, not even public space, you know, just kind of an empty space adjacent to a highway, but still an interesting, engaging piece of public art that does kind of just throw you off and really create that unexpectedness. So I'd love to, oh yeah, and then this is actually a fun type of public art that we're seeing more of, and this is these are dumpster murals. So you're taking these spaces that are completely not places that people want to be, or well, places that are utilized for art typically, and turning them into interesting spaces just by doing this fun public art. So
just as an
yes.
aside, I would love for someone to come in and do a mural on the gardens dumpster.
Oh yeah.
Although I understand we're getting a smaller one. We have a huge one, and it's really in sad shape. But I understand we're going to be scaling down and getting a smaller one because we're getting a space for our mulch and our soil. So
one of the things I love about the dumpster murals, this is actually a program that has risen out of another plan that we did in a neighborhood in Columbus, the University District, where Ohio State University is. And the really cool thing about it is these are, these are low cost, and these are really a good way to help new artists. So like very young artists that haven't done a lot of public work, give them an opportunity to create something that can be part of their portfolio. If it doesn't turn out that well, then that's okay, because it's a dumpster. And part of the program could be or can be that the dumpsters get painted once a year and get a new mural. So it can be more of an ephemeral rotating thing. And there are, not just dumpsters, there's all kinds of programs that you can do like this that are a little bit more temporary, but create opportunities. So, and this is the last one I'll show, but this is another Janet Eckelman piece. And this is a park in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I actually took this picture. Some of the other ones I didn't, but in particular, I was, sorry, I'm changing microphones. This particular piece, Amanda, my business partner, and I went here on a Tuesday night on our way to Raleigh, North Carolina, and showed up in Greensboro. It's a nice town, but it didn't have that lively of a downtown community. But we went out there, and this park was just full of people, and there was a pickup game of football going on, and it was a very diverse, economically, racially, groups of people in the park. And it was really exciting to see this really highbrow, in some ways, piece of public art creating this gathering space for all kinds of people. And so I wanted to really hear from you all to see what types of public art you would like to see in Port St. Lucie. So you saw murals, you saw large sculptures, you saw all kinds of other things. Is there anything specific that stands out to you that you would like to see more of in Port St. Lucie, whether it be at the Botanical Garden or in the areas surrounding that? And I will throw it to Tim to start.
I'd like to see more murals. I know at the Botanical Garden, we've kind of looked at sculptures because we don't have a lot of spaces for murals, but I think murals are really nice. They really kind of, there's the possibility for a lot more expression and colors in scenes.
I would agree with that. I think murals are great.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's good to hear.
I would agree with that as well. And we have a beautiful mural on the side of the storage building at the Botanical Gardens, a butterfly mural by the butterfly garden, and it's just perfect.
Are there other places that you think would be good for murals? I mean, even if it's specifically that you can think of, that would be helpful just so that we can potentially include some of that in the plan.
Hi, Dale here, everybody. Hi to everybody. Sorry I came in a little bit late. I'm not sure as far as where I came in, but on Bayshore and Prima Vista, there's of course the big bridge that goes into St. Lucie West, and on the south end, of course, is a kind of like a retention pond. But in this, it's quite huge, and you see it going over that bridge. A sculpture could go there. There's a storage place, big blank walls, that as you go over, it would be a nice place in order to have something pop out at the people as far as that is. Like I said, I came in a few minutes late. Has the city agreed in order to have this done without all sorts of red tape?
Sorry about that. I was muted. I'll give a brief overview, Dale, just because we did go through it at the beginning, but the way that the city's program is set up is that private developers are required to do public art at their development, and it's called a percent for art. So they need to do 1% of the cost of their project up to $100,000 be devoted to public art, or they can choose to pay 80% of that, whatever that number is, to the city, and that goes into a fund. Now, everything does go in front of the public art board. And one of the things that we're going to do as part of this process is to help streamline that process by just creating really more formalized procedures and policies for the public art board to make it as easy as possible to get projects to happen. So yeah, that's something that we're going to work on, but that's kind of how it's set up. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and any questions that I can't answer, Patty can probably answer about that specifically.
Is there anything we could do with the river? I know it's kind of restricted because of the state land thing. When I was in Arizona last year in Scottsdale, they had done a public installation with lights. It was just incredible. I can't even describe how it was done, but it wasn't like laser lights. It was actual lights, and it was like in the water and outside the water, and it was just amazing.
That's great.
I don't know how many of you know, but we have a company out in Tradition, City Electric, and their public art is actually lighting on the exterior of their building, which is visible from 95. I think you'll see a lot more lighting opportunities, which I think Josh showed in the overpass. Can't remember where that was.
Birmingham.
Birmingham. Because I think lighting's taking on a whole new approach to being art. And I think if you get a chance, go out at night and look at 95 south of Tradition Parkway. You'll see City Electric's lighting program. Wow. And they can modify that based on, purple for autism, pink for breast cancer. They can do all kinds of things, red, white, and blue for July 4th. So I think so adaptable.
Yeah.
I would just add, Patty, I actually went out to the facility that Patty was mentioning and did a tour of the facility with the vice president of that site. And they actually, it's an incredible resource for Port St. Lucie, and hopefully something that we can make light of as part of the plan. But they are lighting experts, and they actually crafted all of that lighting themselves at that facility. They can do all kinds of incredible custom lighting work. So they're really a good resource for projects moving forward in Port St. Lucie. Tim, you had something to add?
Back to the point on murals, I just wanted to make the suggestion that I thought the Civic Center is a really great spot for them. With the events that they host and everything else, it's a really active spot.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And hopefully when we're able to meet in person again, that we can, I think one thing that will be important as part of the response to what is happening right now is using art when things are able to go back to normal, using art to really bring people back together. And in the meantime, using it to continue to create those connections, even when we're not able to meet as we used to be able to. I'd love to open the floor up for questions for either Patty or myself on the public art program or the public art master plan. Anything you need clarification on, or just any other thoughts you had about public art in Port St. Lucie. Would love to open the floor up. And Tim, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, my question would be, well, I know with everything that's going on, it kind of is hard to talk about timelines, but before this all started, did you have a rough timeline when the program would actually start?
Yeah, so well, the public art program itself is already operating. The plan will really give it more direction. And so I know Patty is already working on a few pieces. Of course, the other side component of that is that that obviously as private developers continue to build buildings, they are bringing forward pieces of public art. So that's happening with or without the planning process. But in terms of our timeline for the process, you know, we are still intending on finishing up at the end of the year. We're going to see how much engagement we can do over the next month or two. And then, you know, we're going to kind of gauge where we go from here, but we'll definitely be working to collect as much input as we can in this beginning process, and then kind of see where we go. But we're going to figure it out, and we're going to wrap it up by the end of the year, one way or the other, whether it's all remote or whether we're able to do it in person. Michelle?
My question was, maybe it's directed more to Patty, I don't know. How does the city see the botanical gardens being included in this plan? I mean, I would imagine for the various parks facilities, there might be a percentage of the budget that might be allocated to those organizations, or to those parks, those destination areas. Will there be any specific allocation for arts at the botanical gardens from this project?
I don't know that we'll get into the specifics of direct allocation, because the funding source is ever changing. We have not taken in a lot of money under the new ordinance, which took the threshold from 50,000 to 100, because the money can now come in later. We are also seeing people do their own art pieces, which is not putting money into the pot for the public art, even though it's public art on private sites. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where we go with the master plan. Your master plan, I believe, is still with Parks and Rec. I have shown it to Josh. It's a part of our program. How we incorporate it into the city's master plan, I think, is the next step.
Okay, thank you.
And I do think that, you know, we see, like you said, the whole kind of Westmoreland corridor there, with the Riverwalk and with the Veterans Memorial and with the Botanical Garden and the river. I mean, clearly that's somewhere where we want to highlight, and I don't know that we're going to make a specific recommendation where we say, oh, we need to put a piece of public art in this specific location. But I definitely think that just like you, I think I personally see this area as being something that is akin to a downtown in the sense that Port St. Lucie will ever have one. So we want to really highlight that and create this kind of, I don't know, cultural center there. Not an actual center, but in people's minds. And we want to use public art to connect and unite all these things. So we'll be thinking more about that.
Josh, it goes back to the size of the city too.
Yeah.
You know, we are the third largest city in the state of Florida in land area. Really, I would say second. Bunnell is larger than us, but they have no people. So part of it is going to be distributing that art to all locations as we move forward, as opposed to a concentration.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I mean, there's always a balance, even in communities like Port St. Lucie that are really large. You know, it takes 30 minutes to get from you know, St. Lucie West to the other side of town. So we want to make sure everybody has access and opportunity. But so we'll be balancing those two things. But definitely, we want to see what we can do in both senses. Other questions before we go? I know I had slotted an hour, so I don't want to keep you all, but I'm happy to answer as many questions as possible, or if you have other things to add.
Just want to remind them to take the survey and pass that on to others.
Yes.
So we get the input.
Yes, and let me just send that out in the chat so everyone has it. But it is cityofpsl.com/public art. And if you could share that with folks, that would be wonderful, because we're, you know, without being able to meet in person, that's going to be one of our key ways of getting information from folks. So would love if you could share that. And with that, I will also add that if you guys have any questions or want to talk one-on-one after this, would love to talk with you. And so you can just reach out to me. And if you don't have my email, it's josh@designinglocal.com. And I know Patty is always willing to answer questions as well. So feel free to reach out to Patty or myself, but I would love to chat with you further, or if you have more ideas, etc., feel free to reach out.
I was going to ask one more question if I could. Is there something within the program that includes schools, bringing in the kids, as far as whether it be some sort of a participant in this, or even within their own schools? The appreciation of art has to start somewhere, and it would be nice if it could be included within our schools at this point, in this, you know, as we're starting this out.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we're trying to do as part of this is to collaborate with the schools. And I actually just had a call with St. Lucie, a person from St. Lucie schools today. And so, you know, we wanted to get out and actually get there in the classroom, but with the current situation, we're working to set up something digitally so that we can engage with students and, you know, help teach them about what public art is and get their feedback and hopefully have them go out and experience that. And we're working closely with the school board. So I don't know if I have a specific answer about that, but we want to do that as much as possible, as much as we can. Of course, there's all kinds of constraints with the schools these days, and online learning is not helping that. But we do want collaboration with them. I guess one of the unique things is that the schools are county schools rather than being specifically for Port St. Lucie, but as much as we can create that collaboration. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Patty.
No, I think what's interesting is we attempted to use the school parkway, I believe it is, to use the students to help us work on the art for the Selvets Bay Shore, and it ended up not working out. People wanted it to move faster than allowing the collaboration with the kids. I think we'll have a great relationship with them. The other great relationship we have, and some of you may be aware of it, is the St. Lucie Cultural Alliance. I think it's important if you are an artist to get involved with them. They're doing great things even now through this coronavirus, getting information out to people and artists.
Yeah, Michelle, you had something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether or not seems like the plan is focused primarily on visual public art or sculptural public art. Is there a performance arts piece to this as well?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it is very much a public art master plan that is focused on, like you said, the visual arts. A lot of that has to do with the funding, the way that the funding works. But I think that there are certainly components in the final plan that may touch on performing arts, probably more in its relationship to the physical public art. But, you know, we have to acknowledge when people bring up that they would like to see more of it, or that they, you know, if there are possibilities of us doing like unveilings and collaborations between visual and performing arts as we're doing things. So not really, but there may be collaboration there.
And I think that might be the next step. You will often see communities do art and culture plans, master plans. Because of our funding source, we're starting with the public art, and then I think there'll be a component later dealing with the cultural, performing, those kind of things.
Great, thank you.
One step at a time.
I'm one of those people that I have my hand up for the collaborations. I like visual arts together. That's my thing. But one other thing that I wanted to talk about is just mention that I'd like to see more space, more internal or indoor space used for gallery, in a gallery concept. I know in the past, the pavilion at the Botanical Gardens, and I really haven't talked to anybody about this, so I'm probably going to get feedback because I'm ignorant on this, but we used to use the inside of the pavilion for a gallery space, and we had artists that hung their works there, and then we stopped. So I don't know the background behind that, and like I said, I'm ignorant on this. I haven't really pursued it. It's just something that just popped into my brain right now. So maybe someone can give me feedback on that. But I like the idea, the concept of having new artists, young artists come into public recognition through that kind of gallery concept.
Yes, and the city actually does devote a space at the Civic Center to a gallery that's programmed by the Art League. We've certainly heard, I heard in my conversations with them, a desire for more space like that. Again, it's not exactly what the plan is focused on, but that doesn't mean that we're not paying attention to what people are saying, and we'll look for ways to figure out how we can include that in the plan. Certainly if there are other collaborators that we can work with, like the Botanical Garden, that, you know, if there is a desire to do that, that would be great. Mark, I think that you had something to add?
In terms of Michelle's question, when we would, the pavilion is used for weddings probably 1, 2, 3 times a month. So every time a wedding would come in, they want their decorations up. So all the art would have to be taken down, stored, and then put up after the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a little bit of an inconvenience. So it ended up going by the wayside.
Richard?
Yes, to piggyback on what Mark just said, we did it for years. And when it ended, it was with a change of the leadership on the board. But it was in great part, or a substantial part, due to what Mark just shared, because of the brides and their it's their space for the day or for the afternoon, evening, whatever. And also as regards the Civic Center, that is an art gallery. It's been open since the Civic Center opened December 1 of 2008, and it's been, I don't know of any time it's ever been without an active display. It's a gorgeous space. They're looking now into doing adequate lighting there, or gallery type lighting in that space. It's about a 2,500 square foot space. But back to the gardens, we do have art there, and there are pieces both the mosaic, which Tim refers to as a mural. That's a local artist, Anita Prentice. We have one. The 3 cube sculpture, which is over by the bromeliad garden and the hibiscus garden. That's a Canadian artist. He's noted on the plaque. And then we have the armillary spear, which is over by the bamboo garden, which is a international artist, David Harbour, and including in the pavilion, his piece also hangs in the center. So there's been activity, and originally, long before it was brought up at the board level at the Botanical Gardens for the Friends group, there was a discussion of using pieces that the county and City Fort Pierce own. There were many of them laying around in disrepair. We were going to create the pads that Laura mentioned earlier, I think. And the whole idea was to have them rotate through. As far as security, the property is under secured. It was never clearly thought about at inception. But we've never had a problem with the art as long as it's adequately secured. Thank you.
I was muted, sorry. Thanks for that background, Richard. That was great. Well, before I end the meeting, anybody else have anything that they wanted to touch on or ask questions on?
Take the survey.
Yes, please do take the survey. Thank you guys so much for your time. I hope to meet you in person someday, and we'll definitely follow up. I'll follow up with you, Michelle, with a link to the meeting so that other folks can watch. And thank you, Mark, for posting it on the Gardens Facebook page. That'll be very helpful. But if anybody has any questions, like I said, reach out to me, josh@designinglocal.com, and look forward to chatting with you and taking a tour of the Botanical Garden the next time I'm in Port St. Lucie.
Thank you for providing this opportunity for us to spout off and give you our appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.